So the Moondrop Quarks, probably one of the best IEMs under 20 bucks. Hell, even 30 bucks. Now, when I first saw the frequency response graphs of the Moondrop Quarks, I was just like you. I saw the 3K peak and I was just, oh my god, it's another SSR, it's another spaceship. But color me surprised, that's not the case. Now, disclaimer before we start the review, this Moondrop Quark unit was bought by myself. I bought it with my own money. I bought it from a distributor here in Indonesia. This, at the time of this review, is being sold at 190,000 IDR, which is around like $13 US. And this review will be completely of my own opinion. I'm not affiliated to any brand or any store whatsoever. So yeah. Now, we'll start off with build quality and packaging, because there's not a lot of things to cover. Because the Moondrop Quarks at this low price, you get basically nothing, right? You just get this small box, some wearing guide, doesn't really say much. You got 3 pairs of ear tips, a small pouch, right? Some product manuals, and the IEMs themselves. Now that's fine. I mean, I'd rather take the sacrifice of accessories for sound quality and just overall the IEMs themselves, and boy do they deliver, right? The cable on these isn't the worst cable I've seen. I think they're actually, I quite like the cable. They're quite supple. They're not too microphonic as well. They don't have a chin slider though, which is kind of a bother to me. I don't know, Moondrop has this trend to just not include chin sliders for the budget models. Maybe they think it's a luxury item or something, I don't know. The cable themselves kind of remind me of the color of the Z1R cable, but that's about it. And I just generally think that with how supple these are, I quite like this cable. They're also an angle jack, so I can give them kudos to that. Now, the Moondrop Quarks IEMs themselves, I don't know what on earth these markings are on the back side of the shell. But the red obviously indicates that it's a right unit, and the black says that it's, well, the left unit. And the IEMs themselves are just made out of some plastic. I'm not sure what kind of plastic. They're very, very light. I've been dropping them constantly because I just can't get a good grasp of them because of how tiny they are with my massive hands, right? The shells in general have held up quite well. I've dropped them a few times actually because, well, I keep struggling to hold them. But they don't show any signs of cracks or whatsoever. The drivers are still working fine as well. And generally I think they're built quite solid. As long as you don't keep on tugging on them like crazy, I think you'll do just fine. The nozzle size is also pretty medium size. It's pretty just normal size, like CP100 ear tips or any normal size ear tips will just fit fine on the Moondrop Quarks. And the ear tips that I currently have on them are the orthophone ear tips. They do not come standard with the Moondrop Quarks, just to, remind you of that. Now, let's start off with sound quality, right? The Moondrop Quarks, as I said in the beginning, it's probably one of the best IEMs I've heard under 20 bucks. Might be even 30 bucks. And when I initially saw the graphs, I was, again, like you guys, completely just, hooray, I get to make another rant video. But that was not the case. These were actually pretty decent. Not just pretty decent, they're very good. They sound, I would say they sound more like a sort of V-shaped IEM rather than Harman or whatever. I don't know what kind of target this is that they're following. It seems that Moondrop has this identity crisis sometimes. Like they're sometimes just, for some models like the illumination stuff, they just try to do their own thing. They go like, okay, let's just do diffuse field and just change a couple of things and see how if it sticks with the people or not. And this seems to be one of their attempts, and it has worked out quite well, actually, I would say. Now, let's start off with bass, right? So the bass of the Moondrop Quarks is quite emphasized. It's not to the level of like bass set emphasized, but it is generally emphasized. It has more sub bass than it does mid bass. The slam in the sub bass is very good. Extension is also quite good. Mid bass punch is also quite good. Texture is also good. The speed on these are more on the medium side of things. And Overall, the bass control I think is also quite good, but it still bleeds in the mid slightly. Overall, I think the bass of the Moondrop Quarks is probably one of the better ones in this price range, and actually for 13 bucks, unless you can get your hands on the MH755s, you will not be able to find better bass than what you can get on the Moondrop Quarks. Or at least you'll have a very hard time, because everything else in this price range, stuff like the Knowledge Zenith and such, they're just a bloody mess. Now, mids on the Moondrop Quarks are also one very nice feature they have. They're not too thick, not too thin. Right, vocals I think overall sound just there. They're not too forward, they're not too behind in the mix, and female vocals, male vocals both have quite a nice body to them. And the 3K region, again, as I mentioned earlier, again, is nowhere near as emphasized as something on the SSRs and such. So I didn't find any problems when listening to female vocals as well on these. I think it's just generally a good mid-range for 13 bucks. That's very rare to see, and in the mid-range is also quite nicely textured. Guitars and such sound quite nice on these, and the overall separation and detail on the mid-range is okay. It's definitely not the best I've seen for like under 30 bucks and such, but for this price I think they're doing great. Now the treble region of the Moondrop Quarks is also quite safe, which is quite surprising. Like, if you came for something like the Knowledge Zenith in this price range or something like that, you'd be quite used to the Chi-Fi treble, which just bleeds your ears, right? It's just overly aggressive and stuff like that. It doesn't really sound like anything. The Moondrop Quarks doesn't really have this problem. They're actually quite safe. Speed is on the medium side. Sibilance is served as is, and I might even say that the sibilance is a bit softer compared to of what it should be. Slightly, ever so slightly, not too soft. And there's a dip somewhere in the treble, like around after 11 to 12k, but there's later on a rise again in the after 13 or 14k. So yeah, although the treble isn't particularly emphasized much, this is just a slight nudge in trebles to make it not sound muffled. Now, when we talk about the soundstage of the Moondrop Quarks, if this were my head, the Moondrop Quarks soundstage is like half to 3/4 size. They're not too wide actually, but that's completely fine because the imaging, on the other hand, is also quite good. Now, I need to remind you guys that to me, my perception of soundstage and imaging might differ quite greatly compared to other reviewers, so take it with a huge grain of salt. Accuracy on the imaging that I was able to perceive was around like 45-ish degrees, which is good. Now, at this point in the review, I'll just do a couple of comparisons. Right? Let's just compare it to something like the older model, the Moondrop spaceships, which I do have, but I forgot to bring it to my table, and I'm too lazy to fetch from my bed. So, but I still do have those, because they used to be my the IEMs that I use daily to ride on my bike as earplugs, and now that duty has been replaced with the Moondrop Quarks. Now, compared to the spaceships, the Moondrop Quarks are nowhere near as aggressive as the spaceships. The spaceships can sound very aggressive, and in general, it can be quite fatiguing as well. I think the spaceships are quite aggressive in the upper mids and the treble region, right? And the base of the spaceships, although it just might be slightly tighter than the Moondrop Quarks, the spaceship has way less extension and just way less texture compared to the Moondrop Quarks. The Moondrop Quarks overall, I think, are just thicker sounding. The spaceship's mid-range also is thinner compared to the Moondrop Quarks, and I think in general you're just better off getting the Moondrop Quarks compared to the spaceships, unless you like that very aggressive sound, because especially if you're coming from the Knowledge Zenith, right, which we're going to be doing a comparison next, compared to something like the EDX. If you went from the EDX to the Moondrop Quarks, the first thing that you'll notice probably, oh, There's like no bass where bass. Where there's some bass but not much bass. Treble gone, no treble, right? Because typical chi-fi tuning in this price range is to just emphasize the treble and just emphasize the bass as much as possible, because that seems to be the most popular frequency response that people like, right? Compared to the EDXs, the Moondrop Quarks has significantly less treble. It also has actually quite a bit less bass compared to the EDXs. Overall, the Moondrop Quarks just have way better control in the bass. It has a way better treble compared to EDXs. The EDXs are just no longer relevant compared to the Moondrop Quarks. Comparing the Moondrop Quarks to something like the Tangim Tanyas now, the Tangim Tanyas overall sound warmer, they sound thicker, they also sound a bit softer compared to the Quarks. So if you find the Quarks to be too aggressive to you, right, which can happen, especially if you're very sensitive to the 3K region, which I usually am, but even I am not able to perceive this 3K peak as much as it should, like it shows on the graph, then you might want to just take the Tanyas. But overall, the Moondrop Quarks, to me, they just sound tighter, they just sound slightly brighter. Right? The Tanyas compared to the Moondrop Quarks sound muffled. And overall, I think they're both solid choices. And on both of those IEMs, and this is something I should have probably mentioned earlier on in the review, you have to pay attention to how you fit these IEMs into your ears. The stock ear tips don't really do it for me. I was not able to fit these properly using the stock ear tips because I was not able to fit them in enough. The treble region was quite emphasized. Upper mids showed its nasty side, and the same problem I had with the Tanyas as well. And the mid range overall also sounded quite hollow. Bass was also pretty much just non-existent, right? So that's why I swapped over to the orthophone ear tips. Something like the Sony hybrid ear tips will also fit quite well, and they'll also work quite okay, right? So I think anything aside from the stock ear tips will do you just fine, right? Anything that's a bit more supple and can fit a bit deeper into your ears will do you just okay. Now, last comparison compared to the TR and MT ones. Compared to the TR and MT ones, I think the TR and MT ones for this price range is probably one of the better chi-fi IEMs, and I think against the MT ones are more aggressive compared to Moondrop Quarks. I think tightness of the bass, I think the MT ones is probably quite comparable. I think the MT ones are just a bit more aggressive compared to the Moondrop Quarks overall, and the MT ones have this sort of like they have quite a bit of a different fitting profile, so some people might prefer that compared to the Moondrop Quarks. But overall, as a package, I think the Moondrop Quarks just sound overall just better to me as an overall package. They sound more balanced or neutral, right? And that's more or less everything I have to say about the Moondrop Quarks. And I need to remind you, if you do feel that the treble and the upper mid regions of these are too aggressive, if you feel like they're too thin and such, just try swapping ear tips, try fitting them better, and I think you'll be rewarded quite greatly. I think that's it for my review. Like if you like this video, comment what you think, and subscribe if you want more content like this. Buy these. See ya.